Mooring Working Group. Sorry. That's our intro music. So
Every group has one.
yes, exactly. Tonight, basically what I'd like to do is recap what we all talked about in terms of the Bog Bridge mooring area, and then look at our Barrett's Cove area over there and discuss people's thoughts on that, specifically the area between the rowing dock, McGonagall rowing dock and the boat ramp, and then some of the other areas along the ledges on Route 52 and west of the swim beach. And if we have time, we can start talking about shorefront owners' moorings. With that, anybody have any opening remarks?
I would just say I had a chance to talk to the harbor master in Harrison, and who manages 557 moorings. Seems like a lot. I don't know how many we have out on the lake. I'm guessing it's
Saltwater or lake?
It's a lake.
lake. So that's Long Lake, and I'm not sure which other lake that they have. And he will send to me their updated mooring ordinance. So the original one that we were working from is dated 2009, but they've passed a new one. It's going to be published in May, but he's going to see if he can get us an advance copy of that. You're probably aware of this.
Yep.
Is that, are they private or public moorings?
Yeah, so the way that they do it, and it wasn't entirely clear to me from reading through this, and it may not have been to others, which is why I bring it up, is that what they did is they decided that it made sense to regulate moorings because they didn't want people going in and throwing them in happenstance. And that's all we've ever had so far, is people throwing them in happenstance. Nancy may not like my mooring, which is happenstance off the town landing, off the town's property, but hers is equally happenstance off of her own property. And so what they did is they said, we're going to regulate all moorings, and the way that they do it, as you may or may not know, is that if Nancy wants a mooring, or if I want a mooring, or if anyone wants one, they go to the harbor master and say, I'd like to get a mooring. And then the harbor master decides, can I find an appropriate location? If it's in Nancy's case, it would be, is there an appropriate location maybe off of Nancy's property? In a way that doesn't impinge on her neighbors, et cetera. And in the mooring, what they call the DMZ, or the designated mooring zone, which is that 100 to 200 feet or whatever it is, non-navigable, not obstructing navigation and all of this. They have decided that so the harbor master decided that they'll also have some designated mooring areas that are sort of public. And if someone else comes in and says, if you went down there and said, hey, I'd like to put a mooring in, you'd say, what kind of boat do you have? And, do I see that there's any space left? And then say, oh, well, I can put you down here. It's not in the designated mooring area, but it's in the designated mooring zone off of somewhere. If you think you can get to your boat adequately and do it, and it's not obstructing passage or these other things, they allow it to occur. And they leave it to the discretion of the harbor master. And so they hire a professional. They're giving them guidelines as to how to work. And that's how they've dealt with it. And it seems apparently to be the model that seems to be working and seems to make some sense. And so that person then approves tackle. And if you don't have a boat, you can't get a mooring. You can't just put a mooring out for no reason. And there's a whole series of other things, but that's the general gist of it, which to me seems like a pretty reasonable way to go about doing it.
Do you know if they had to deal with people who already had moorings in and
So they're
inspected or something, or how would they determine?
I'm not entirely sure, but it's when the mooring regulations went in, they said everybody has to apply through the harbor master, because the idea is Nancy's mooring may be perfectly fine, but the harbor master doesn't know that. My mooring might be perfectly inadequate, and the harbor master doesn't know that. So the harbor master, just like we have in the harbor here says, hey, this is a good location, and you can drop it there. Obviously, there'd be a work-in period, presumably, where people would look and say, hey, this is where I've historically been, is this acceptable? And they might say, yeah, that's absolutely adequate, or, hey, that's not adequate, but if you move it 30 feet out, that's perfectly fine. The idea, and then there's, things about if people have a right-of-way, if you've bought next to someone who has a right-of-way, they might be able to put someone out in front of Nancy's property if Nancy was next to a right-of-way, because if that right-of-way existed when she bought it, she shouldn't have had any presumption that those people wouldn't have the right, or wouldn't perhaps want to put a mooring out. And they, it seemed like a very reasonable way to go about doing it to satisfy everybody's rights, because the right, and this is what I caught me somewhat by surprise. He said, the thing I keep repeating to everybody is, the state of Maine owns the water and you do not. And it doesn't matter if it's someone who has property on the lake or someone who doesn't. That's the bottom line, is the state of Maine owns the property, or owns the water. And so all of us have the same right to moor within it. And he would not, in this case, he does not place someone's non-riparian owner's mooring in front of Nancy's house, because he says that would be ridiculous. Why would we do that? Except if Nancy was next to a right-of-way, then we might put someone who has access to that, legal access to that right-of-way. We might go one or two properties over so that their rights or their access can be recognized, et cetera. To me, it seemed like a pretty reasonable way to go. They've been doing it, since at least 2007.
Right.
That description is different than what we had originally with the Harrison plan. This is
No,
more
it's just
updated.
it's just a somewhat
It's
more.
about the same.
It's a little more,
Matured.
right. Right, and what wasn't clear was what they didn't say in Harrison, and what this ordinance doesn't say is, it doesn't say that they restrict, that they say that you can put moorings in the designated mooring zone, which is defined as a distance off of the land around the shoreline. And they also have designated, as we seek to do, a more well-organized, I guess, designated mooring area, which is perhaps what we would think of as off of the two boat launches, where there might be more, more concentrated there, because it might just make sense, because that's close to the launch. They said for them, some of the big concerns are the number of people that want to launch boats at their launch sites, that, that's a big problem that they have. Too many people want to launch, and they don't have places for those people to park. They see the moorings as a way to help alleviate that, because now they're people with cars, not
Cars and trailers.
cars and trailers. And, you could conceivably have someone drop you off if you're going out on your boat for the day or something like that. There are ways that you could do it that don't require you to drive in with a trailer and so forth. These were things that he brought up to me unprompted. I said, so, what does it look like? He said, we've got the town has one landing on a 10-mile lake. Long Lake is 10 miles long. And he said it just gets, people run out of parking. He said, and they say, well, what am I supposed to do? He said, you got to find a legal parking spot. You can't park illegally. I don't know that that's been a big issue for us, illegal parking. And it does turn out that coming down, from Beveridge Farm and over the hill there on Turnpike, that is not a bike lane. I talked to our public works director and the road supervisor, and they said, no, that is not a designated bike lane. Parking there, as long as you're not over the white line, is completely legal, completely acceptable. And, not that we encourage it, but that's totally.
Similar to Bog Bridge, where they say if you keep your tires off the tar, then
Right,
you're fine.
although there that's what they say, but there's no way you would know that. I think everybody knows you can't park over the white line. I think people know that, and there's a white line there, so it makes it easier to do. I'm quite frankly, I'm scared. It scares the heck out of me if someone parks on the side of the road around Bog Bridge. It's just way too tight.
Yeah, it is too
And-
tight,
and
I agree.
I think we could all agree that's an area that we should encourage the state to maybe designate in some way that doesn't allow
And
that.
they park
Dream
where
a
they put
little.
the floats
Well, that's where people park now.
Yeah.
in the summer.
And
Yeah.
then when that's full, then people will park alongside the road.
Yeah.
Sometimes people park on the side of the road, which is crazy
Well,
dangerous.
it's just as tight at Route 52. I mean, people go barreling down that road.
They do, because the
A little
speed
wider,
limit.
but not much.
Well, I think if you were to measure it off, I would suggest the pavement is quite a bit wider and the setback. I mean, on the one side where you've got the guardrail, I've never seen anyone park on that side. That seems insane. But on the other side, there's, I mean, even in the non-boating season, you get people who are climbing up Maiden's Cliff, and there's often
Oh, yeah.
overflow parking.
Yeah.
People are parking all the way back, and it's not that far a walk if you were to park there at the base of the cliffs or something like that. Again, this is what I learned from him and just, again, my opinion about those parking spots. I'm really concerned about people's safety. To me, that's a huge priority. Again, that's not really our charge or our mission, but I think we have to understand that what we do may impact that. And so we ought to at least be cognizant. Yeah, oh, yeah, please.
So in Harrison, right?
Yeah, Harrison, yep.
Oh, my God.
Which dog doesn't like Harrison?
What, are they parking, is it town property? Or is it are they mooring the boats in front of private property? I know it doesn't matter
No.
where you moor your boat, but
No,
it's
good question.
access to their boat.
Yep.
So
So-
in Harrison, is it all private property? Is it?
It's a mix. It's a mix of, so the harbor master will not give a non-riparian owner a mooring in front of a riparian owner's site unless it is because they have legal access to a right of way.
So they can access their boat without going on private property?
Exactly.
Yep. And, but he said we also have, they have considerable, and I don't know how much, town land. And he said, and that's where we put moorings, non-riparian owners moorings. It could be riparian owners. If you wanted to have another boat and you wanted to have it over on the other side of the lake, you could do that. You could say, hey, I'd like to apply for that and put one over there. And they regulate, how many you can have based on how many feet of frontage you have and things like this. And in some cases, they concentrate in this, in a designated mooring area within the designated mooring zone. So the zone is the more global, hey, it's this strip around the lake. And the area is a more conscribed rectangle essentially or something like
Which is
that.
more or less what we're trying to do, is find mooring fields or designated mooring areas for.
Right,
non-riparian.
within the within the state's allowed mooring zone, kind of thing. So, I think we know we all aren't going to agree on a lot of things, but maybe there's some of that very baseline stuff that we can agree on.
Oh, exactly.
I
And
have
that's,
another question.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, like for Harrison, do they allow, like what David Lyman is doing, where he's dropped 4 moorings without any of his boats on them, but renting them to people who put boats on them? Is that something that we're going to continue to allow?
So that's something that would be, so I think they say you can't rent moorings. David, in fact, does keep his own boat out on one of the moorings.
Okay,
And
well,
he's
that's
put,
fine.
yeah, he's put the gear in for the other people because, whatever, today's his 80th birthday, happy birthday, David. But he's got time presumably and understands what it is. And so his friend, Dr. Starr, says, can you help me out? And he says, yeah, I'll go place that in there. And the person essentially, I believe it is that he's sort of paid David for the gear. I don't know that, and I think David will pull it up or whatever. I don't think it's terribly dissimilar to me hiring Rob Iserbet to put my mooring out in the harbor.
But he charges. He sat right here and said.
Yeah, he does
He-
for
It's
the,
rent for
It's-
people who put their boats.
yeah,
Well, he
maybe it's
called-
rent,
yeah.
maybe it's
Set.
whatever, but
he called it rent, so I mean,
Yeah.
it's just.
again,
It's a-
the idea is that it's, the idea is not to be operating a marina, and I think that's pretty clear, that no one is to be operating a marina. I mean, I think in the case of David, it's more a public service. But trust me, whatever he charges, no one is
Well-
earning anything off of it, so to speak, but, It's a good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah, I think it's a point that we would consider, and if there were a harbor master for the lake, or if this fell into the, I don't think it would, I don't know if it could even be, it would be possible to
I don't think that would.
connect the two. No, there'd have to be a separate harbor master or something,
Yeah.
some situation that would be managed by that person and under guidelines that have been set by the ordinance, really.
Right.
And we're framing that.
Yeah, if people apply individually, again, I would say, gee, if Taylor was the harbor master, I'd say, hey, Taylor, I've got a 17-foot aluminum boat. I'd like to get a mooring out there. And he says, great, fill in the application and send it to me. And then he goes and looks at his charts and says, yeah, it looks like I could put somebody over here. That looks like there's space enough. It's got the swing distance. It's adequate, for that. And he'll say, great, let's go out. We'll help you, get your mooring placed out there. This is the location for it. And you place it. And like the harbor, you can't, if you get the rights to put a mooring out there, you don't just go drop something in. It's got to be approved tackle. They got to look at it and say, yeah, it's in a big enough mushroom for that boat.
And location. And
Yeah,
location.
location, gear, and then you have to have it, in that case, you have to have it inspected. And whether we need that or not, I'm not sure. It doesn't seem like there's been lots and lots of boats floating away from these things, so it doesn't seem like that's been a problem. But
Well, they've been dragging, but other than that.
Yeah,
So, but no, I agree. It's,
I don't know how much we want to solve problems that we don't actually have.
right.
I think that just kind of just simplify sort of, I think, what the task, and you hit it at some point in there. The task, at least from the point of view of the select board, I think the primary issues that sort of brought this to a head to create a working group in the first place is some version of user conflict. And that the feeling that moorings are increased, like you said, happenstance.
Yeah, so all
Place
the
of
moorings
moorings.
are happenstance, as we know.
So anyway, I think that the simplest way that we can attack what the issue is, we don't want to solve problems that don't exist, obviously, is the best way forward. And I think the reality is Lake McGonagall is not that big of a lake. So I just want to emphasize, I think the simplest path forward is the best one for us. In terms of what's presented to the select board, I know we've talked about this before, but like Brian just said, I think it's perfectly fine that not everybody may agree on every point, and but as long as this group discusses it, debates it, feels like, we've turned over every rock, and there may be three, right down the middle on certain issues, that's presented to the select board that we've talked about this. We couldn't come to a consensus on these things, but this is where we're at.
That's exactly what I've been saying in the emails. Is
Yeah.
We're presenting them with the various options that we looked at and giving them some indication that we have broad consensus on this. We don't necessarily have consensus on this. We're hopelessly deadlocked on this issue,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then hopefully throw the ball in their court and let them figure it out.
I think that's what the board would be expecting.
So, and getting back to that, just a little recap on Bog. We do have broad consensus that Bog Bridge would be a good place for a designated mooring field. However, we don't, 3 people came back and felt that, well, let me start there. We have broad consensus on that. One thing I'd like to do, and I'll send out an email on this, is little homework for the crowd. Expand, all I need is a paragraph, but expand on why you feel Bog is a good place for a mooring field. Because that's the kind of thing I think that the select board wants to know. We all thought Bog would be a good place to put a mooring field. Why? Because X, Y, and Z, that kind of thing. And so if people could do that, and I'll send out an email tomorrow, and obviously Thanksgiving's coming up, but if we can get something by early next week, that'd be good on that. moving on that, as everybody saw in the emails, three folks felt that Barrett's Cove was not a good place to put moorings, and two obviously did. And that's what I'd like to discuss tonight and try to flesh out people's reasons, yay or nay, on why that is, considering, safety, water quality, interference with navigation, that sort of thing, effects on aquatic habitat, all the whole gamut of stuff that we're looking at here. And the first place I'd like to talk about on that is where we have the moorings now, which is between the rowing dock and the boat ramp. And anybody here want to flesh out their comments that is either a decent place to put a mooring field or not so decent?
In thinking this whole thing through and after our last discussion, and I think I said this the last time we met, I'm of the opinion that we should start with Bog Bridge and leave Barrett's Cove unfettered and see what the pressure is for moorings, for more moorings. If there is pressure for more moorings, then perhaps hold out Barrett's Cove as a possible site, or perhaps the only site where there could be non-riparian moorings put in. But I just think that, and perhaps we should formulate that as a possible second site to the select board. But I think the first and foremost, we ought to start with one small field and see how that goes, see what the pressure is. And if there's a tremendous amount of pressure from the town for people to put moorings in, then.
For instance, if we immediately had,
40 people.
let's say we had 15 moorings over there, let's just say,
Yeah.
straw man on that. And we had 15 or 20 people immediately on the waiting list after we go through the process of allotting those moorings.
Right.
Obviously, there's more pressure
Yeah.
and,
And then another site would have to be considered, and I suppose that really is the only other site on the lake that's feasible, that is, not privately owned property. That's my thought, anyway.
Yep.
And just to let Barrett's be a secondary site, but no borings put there. And that would be in the ordinance that, we'd start with one site and then as pressure mounted. And another reason I think for that is, we talked about the issues of safety and access, and how challenging the access was for people who are launching boats. And I think there is a problem there because there's not an awful lot of place to, once you get 10 trailers, not even that, probably in that lot, it's full, and then people are going to have to find another place to park. And I think, as I recall, just driving down 52, in that stretch, like between maybe a little bit after Beveridge, you want to be close enough so the walk isn't arduous, but so perhaps Beaucaire up to the public landing. I think the side of the road is pretty wide, and so it would be reasonable to have a trailer and a truck or a trailer and a car there, parked there.
And they do.
Probably several. And they do?
yeah, they do. On
Peak weekends, yeah.
peak weekends, it's from the climbing cliffs, basically the top of the hill, all the way down to the boat ramp with various users of the lake as well as the
Yeah.
Maiden's Cliff area.
And I also think, going back to the last discussion we had about it, that if we could somehow have Monroe Goodwin's help perhaps in making that parking area where they put all the floats a little bit better designated for parking. I mean, I'm not sure.
Talking about a
how you
bog
do that.
bridge.
Yeah, bog bridge, yeah, going back.
Organize the parking.
Organize it a little bit better, that would be,
Are they okay with us parking there?
It's a lease. It's a lease. The town leases that parking lot from maybe June 1st, maybe May 15th, I'm not sure, until I believe it's October 1st. Maybe October 15th. But essentially, once all the docks are out, the town has that as a parking area for the boat ramp. Before that boat ramp was redone, and again, can't remember when it was,
4 or 5 years ago, I think.
it was more than that. It was more, oh, yeah,
It was almost 10 years ago.
easily, yeah.
Yeah.
But that had become a major issue because there's so little parking there, and then people are parking on both sides of the road there, and it was a one-lane road coming down through there. Organize the parking there. That, again, it's not necessarily our purview, but it can be a
Connected.
recommendation
Yeah.
kind of thing.
It influences.
Yeah,
Yeah,
certainly. Yeah.
So, yeah, obviously, if you can have again what the, I like that. So if you have again the number of trailers and cars you can get in there, that obviously makes things a little easier, so.
and my last thought, I guess, is, I really like the idea of having a harbor master or someone, perhaps, I don't know, maybe it could be the lake warden, but, it's gonna be a job that has a lot of front-end loaded activity, and then it's gonna taper off to where this person is gonna be like the Maytag washer machine man. He's
Right.
sitting, doing nothing. And so I wouldn't want it to become a job that eventually ended.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's all right.
I'm at the wrong
What are you looking for?
upper house meeting.
I don't think they're doing one this week because of the holiday. Yes,
Thank you so
that's why
much.
we're here.
You're welcome.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too. What meeting is this?
Inland moorings,
Inland Mooring.
very different from the Opera House, but just as exciting.
No, I just wrote the manager, the town manager, because I saw it on the agenda. And I said, inland moorings are in what's happening in the harbor, right?
In the
No,
Lake
inland.
Magenta, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha. Inland.
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 As opposed to marine.
Thank you.
There's our YouTube viral moment.
And the other thought I had about that is I can see a lot of pushback if there's a fee associated with it, which I'm sure there would have to be. So, me as a person who lives, well, I share it with all my, multitudes of cousins and nephews and everything. But a camp on the lake that has probably 2 moorings and a float that's off moored and then one that's connected moored. So what is that? I don't know, 6 anchors, maybe more. And if I have to pay somebody to inspect all those 6 anchors and make recommendations, I just think that there might be some pushback, but maybe not.
I think, we've talked about this before, but it's worth bearing repeating that anytime we're looking at ordinances for anything, things like this, there's always an increase in staff time component that we're really being careful about what that impact is. So I think, the inland, figuring out who the inland harbor master would be and how that would work and how much time would take we have to be careful with it. I think the best version of that is if Dale is willing to take on that role, since he's already kind of doing it now, makes the most sense, streamlined, and like you said, if it's, I think having someone, putting an ordinance where everything has to be inspected on a yearly basis might be a bridge too far.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't, I mean, it certainly wouldn't need,
No, you know,
Again-
yearly basis.
in the idea of not solving a problem that we don't have.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
There have been a few things that have dragged, and so it's like, if something starts dragging, that's the one you look at and say, hey, you know what? This isn't adequate for that.
Well, and also in some place like Bog Bridge or even Barrett's Cove, you can write standards into your ordinance saying you've got to have this, that, and the other thing, the blue striped ball and your name on it and all that sort of thing. And it's fairly easy to go over with a view tube and check and see if they've got it. If the guy's got a 5-pound Danforth anchor and, some clothesline, then you go, hey,
Right.
ain't gonna work. It's not, as you said, there's a little front end work for whoever is going to be out there overseeing this. But, once it's all put together, it's not a big deal, so. Brian, you have any thoughts on, John said he thinks starting at Bog Bridge and holding Barrett's Cove for possible expansion later. What are your thoughts on Barrett's Cove between the road where the moorings are now?
I don't think that that's an inappropriate location. I have failed to see where it has impeded navigation, save for the enormous barge. I can't remember how many feet long that is, but again, that's a barge that I don't dispute the interest in getting it out there and doing some work on the lake, but that's something that could be handled. I mean, it's clearly, the launch area is clearly not designed for that. And we know that because if you have vehicles in there, you can't launch that boat. Ergo, it's not designed for that boat. If you want to launch a boat that's that big, you're going to need to launch it early season or late season, or come what may, you may not be able to get it out because there's other people there. I don't think we can unnecessarily restrict the public's right to park and to launch their boats because someone's got a giant boat, unless you say, hey, you know what, launch that before the 15th of May, take it out after the 15th of October, and we'll cone off that area and say, no one's going to use it that morning when you're launching that thing, if we need to. I don't think that it's been an issue in general.
Do they have a place to store it during the summer? Do you know?
Well, it goes over onto one of the islands.
Crane, isn't it?
I think it's Crane.
It's
Yeah, I
Crane.
think
It is
I
Crane.
can't remember. Yeah, so it stays parked there, and
okay.
quite frankly, I don't know if anybody else sees it out doing much work ever. I mean, it went over to the little watershed party, and it was, the party barge, and that was kind of fun. I mean, I swung over and hopped on it because it was a nice platform. But I think that's an unusual circumstance, and again, I think that we can, with a regulated, whether it's a harbor master, and if Dale, and it would seem he would be natural to do it potentially, but it doesn't seem like that's a hard one to work around. Someone's trying to launch a 25-foot boat. If anybody's parked in there, they're not going to be able to do it. It's just, it can't happen. And so I don't think that that's a big issue.
So you don't feel that there's impacts in navigation from over there?
I don't. Again, I think things need to be within the right zone, but, I mean, we've allowed apparently and this is, in fact, the ropes that the rowing committee puts out there, I guess the town authorizes them to be able to allow to put that line out there, but I'm not even entirely sure.
Yeah.
But
I can't remember the circumstance behind that, but
is this like a haul
someone told it.
no, it's
It's essentially to give the shells, the oars are so, probably, I don't know, I mean, maybe 14 feet away from or 12 or 14 feet away from the boat. And it's on either side. And so you're swinging a large, like, barge type configuration into coming down the lake and then swinging it into the dock. And if they have to negotiate boats that are moored too close, either they're going to hit it with the oars And the oars they're fragile enough so they could crack if you hit it hard enough. Or it just makes landing a boat very difficult
So
on that
what you,
side.
so the
So what we
Magenta
did was-
Growing has buoys with a line?
Yeah, what somebody suggested to Amy Wilton, I think it was Amy who did it, you just string a set of, buoys on a line,
like a
and then there's a
swimming
big.
line.
Yeah, it's like
Similar
swim
to
line,
what's
yeah.
at the beach.
Big buoy at the end of it, kind of marking the, quote unquote, our territory, just to make sort of a delineation between any moored boats. And now, there were times, according to them, I never saw it, that some of the boats in the northerly breeze swung down. So it made turning hard for them. And in a breeze, those boats, especially with a breeze that's blowing against, sideways against their hulls, they're hard to maneuver. So it just makes it a little more challenging.
Anything else, sir?
No, I think that there is space there. I think it's limited by swing distance and size of boats and those kinds of things. But I would suggest that in many ways it's really even a better site than over at Bog, in that Bog gets very does get quite shallow when the lake is low, and it's just a more difficult area, and you've got a much longer slow access in and out of there, and there's you can't sort of get out onto the lake proper nearly as quickly as you can if you're launching if someone's launching a boat, as some people do, a kayak or a canoe or a sailboat or paddleboard from either Barrett's Cove or from the launch site. You can quickly get out onto the lake proper. The lake opens up much more quickly. For those reasons, I think it's a somewhat better site in some ways.
You mean
What-
Barrett's Cove?
what-
Barrett's Cove.
Over
What you mean is, from Barrett's Cove, you're out beyond the no-wake zone.
Well, it just opens up, so there's a lot more space a lot more quickly, because you don't have to go through that, further sort of, narrows, beyond it. And I do think that while I appreciate the fact that the town doesn't want to be grandfathering folks in, that unless there is a real need unless there's a defined reason to restrict the Barrett's Cove site, I don't know why we would restrict that unnecessarily and make people who've been there or who want to be there to be somewhere else if that's not an inadequate area in which to be. I get the fact that riparian owners for whom it is in their view shed would feel differently, and I completely understand that. But I would also suggest that when riparian owners made their purchase, there should have been no expectation that there was a view shed protection in any part of anywhere in the town of Camden. If your neighbor wants to put a big house up in front of you, if it meets the ordinance, they have every right to be doing that. Much as we might not like that, we don't have protections like that in place unless it's generally acceptable to the public to put those in. I suggest it wouldn't be for most
I
people.
just want to make two quick points. First, Boggs Bridge, I think, the accessibility doesn't seem that dramatic to me, but it's a much more protected area, you have to admit. I mean, it's protected out of almost all directions because of its nature. So
It's protected out of
so,
all
yeah,
directions.
Yeah, it really is. And so that's peace of mind. And the other thing that I would worry about by having two areas is, and maybe this is a completely crazy concern, but you might get 6 people who want to do one area and 6 people who want to do the other area, and then you've got 12 moorings, which you could have had all in one place. But you got people who don't want to be at Boggs Bridge and people who do want to be at Boggs Bridge. Bog Bridge. So it just seems to me like I proposed at first, start with one area. If there's a demand, then you can expand to the other area. But, or it would be up to perhaps the select board to say no or something like that. I don't know.
I think in terms of, I'll just say, in terms of user conflict, what I've heard, I've had maybe 3 people approach me personally at various points over the summer concerned about boats getting in and out of the launch and their proximity to boats that were moored. One person mentioned something about that being an active cove near the swim beach as well, and worried, even though swimmers are in a protected area there, that they're just concerned about congestion in general. And there was one woman that came to a select board meeting, I think in July or August, towards the end of the summer, who came to a meeting, and at the beginning of the meeting, she spoke and brought up her concern that she would have tried to launch a boat. It was a 2-part concern. She had tried to launch a boat, and there was a parking issue for her getting her trailer in there and then finding a place to park the trailer after she launched the boat, but that also difficulty getting out and back in with moored boats close to where she had launched it. So that's what I've heard in terms of complaints in that area. A handful of people, not a lot, but that's what I heard.
Nancy,
So, of course, I agree with mooring field at Boggs Bridge. Mainly because there's nothing going on there except launching boats. There's no rowing teams, there's no beach. I think it's actually better that boats have to go slowly out to get into the main part of the lake, rather than getting in their boat and speeding off. But being in Barrett's Cove, we do use that area, I do use that area as a ski area. In Boggs Bridge, there isn't any of that. You're in there only to launch your boat, take it in, put it in and take it out, basically. Whether it's a paddleboard, a kayak, a rowboat, a motorboat, whatever it is. That's the whole purpose for Boggs Bridge. There's no speeding boats, there's no swimmers, there's no rowers other than people going out, which the boat should be going slow anyways. I think that's a plus. There's no need to have fast access to the lake. Barrett's Cove is too congested. There's kids swimming, there's people swimming outside of the swim lines. You can say we have swim lines. I live there, I see what goes on. They do not swim in the swim lines. They swim over on the side, the other side where David wanted to put another mooring field over towards the houses.
Yeah, the little pocket there.
Yeah, they swim there, kids swim there. My kids row there. They go to the beach all the time in the rowboat. You know, my only concern, like I expressed to you in my email, was the shallowness of Boggs Bridge. Doesn't happen every year. I don't think it happened this year, but it does happen when we get a drought, or now we don't have the dam issues, necessarily.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, but there again, how long is that going to last? And are we going to have another issue with that that's going to drain the lake quickly or more quickly? Quicklier, how do you like my English? So I think Boggs Bridge, you have more room. I just don't know, who is it that the town owns just to the landing there, and then is it?
yes, and what it is, and it's a something that I have to follow up on. I had a verbal conversation with Coastal Mountain Land Trust.
Yeah, okay.
And they did not have an issue with the moorings.
But what about access to the moorings? How does that, do they want people walking on their land, or will they swim out from the launch ramp?
I felt, from our conversation, they obviously didn't want people parking there and charging down through the wood. They basically didn't want it to become a parking lot and pathway to the mooring area. But, obviously, if someone walks through the woods and all that, the only conflict at that point would be if there's too much usage going out there.
Yeah.
And I think the way that's set up there, most people would probably go off from around the launch area and to get out there. I got a question, and before, I'll let you finish. What do we have for water depths, within 100 feet of the shoreline over at Baird's Cove now?
It's not bad.
12, 8?
I think it's probably, with 100 feet, probably, I did some measuring just around the rowing dock for,
Yeah.
potential launch docks that we just need desperately. And my measurements, I think, were right. The boulders now you can see because the lake is low.
Yeah.
And just off those boulders, probably 5 feet, but that was when the lake was high, 5 to 6 or 7 feet.
But
And
so
then it
is that
slopes
what you-
out, I'm sure.
Is it get deeper where you guys are mooring your boats?
Yeah, I think I couldn't tell you exactly, because I don't recall, but
Yeah.
it's somewhere in
10
that,
feet.
6 to 10 foot range, I think. So it's, again, I think adequate for small boats, not for huge
And
boats.
it's actually over at Bog Bridge, in this area that we're looking at, it's not that much different. It might be on the 6 to 9 foot, but I've done a number of snorkel surveys through there. And it's, for instance, when you're out here and when we're looking for invasive plants and stuff like that, you have to do it with a snorkel because you got to dive down to do it. You can't get it from a boat, even with a rake.
Yeah.
So,
Do you think at Boggs Bridge, I drove by there earlier today just to kind of look at it, and I couldn't quite picture where the channel was exactly. That was something, the question popped into my mind was, how close would the channel be to a mooring area, or not
You
close?
know probably where the channel is better than any of
well,
us.
what channel
What channel
there is?
which ain't much,
Let's
but,
put channel in quotes, I guess, the channel.
Yeah,
yeah,
and I can do this with the.
yeah, I didn't know if that was gonna show up, but I thought maybe it would.
This is an approximation of it because this is Sucker Brook, is the brook that comes down on the other side, and you have that wetland area, and then you have the bog bridge. And then on the other side of that, most people, when they launch here, don't pay any attention to that and just charge out through the stuff. But
Until we get to the markers, right, which is way out, right?
Well, no one,
way out, and that's, all that is a constriction so people don't hit rocks.
Okay.
And there's no actual channel. This is the deepest area, and then you come out and this sort of meanders, but by the time you're here, you're in 6-8 feet of water anyways,
Okay.
no big deal. The shallowest area is right here,
Yeah.
and then on this side over here, it's, 6-8 feet of water on that side as well, where they're mooring the boats now.
Right now, yeah.
So,
So would they not moor boats over there anymore if we designated the field on the other side, or could we do both sides?
well, that, again, there's that question. What I've always felt about that is this area right here. I'm not doing very well because that's actually the house, so it's actually, this is that lot right here. And it's got over 500 feet of frontage there. And I don't know what it's got for acreage, but conceivably, someone might be able to subdivide that at some point. And then if someone's got another house here, then you have that issue of being right in front of someone's house. That's the only reason why I thought it was a good idea to put the mooring field across over in front of the Coastal Mountain Land Trust Preserve, because that's never going to have a house on it. And so it's not town property, but on the other hand, it's never going to have a house. So that's why I thought that might be a good idea, so.
And that's, of course, my personal reason for having it at Boggs Bridge, because I have to look at everything that goes on in front of my house. I mean, it's become a circus. You know, it's just, there's too much going on over there. And with my mooring, my little sailboat mooring, I have no problem with somebody inspecting it and saying that the little, brake disc that I have holding it there is really not adequate. I need to do something else for my little tiny sailboat. But I don't think as a property owner, I should have to pay to have that mooring. But people putting moorings in at Boggs Bridge who don't own property on the lake, or people putting moorings in at Barrett's Cove, if they're not property owners, I think they should pay something. But I am a property owner, I already pay taxes. I don't think I should have to pay on top of that to have a mooring off the corner of my float. That's just my personal feeling. I'll take my boat out, if that's the way it's going to be. I just won't launch it. I'm getting too old to do it anyway, so it's not a big deal. But Boggs Bridge is a bigger area. There's no houses right now. I just think it's a better area. There's no congestion. There will be, but not as bad as I keep calling it McGonagall, not as bad as Barrett's Cove. There's too much going on there.
So we've got that. I'm going to try to get, even though we both got, we all have received David's and Polly's thoughts on this. I'm going to, in that email, expressly ask them to give us why Bog is good, because everybody says it's good, and why Barrett's is good or bad, because Polly's on record saying that she feels that there shouldn't be moorings there, and David obviously feels there should. So get that information, then we've got it. And I'll put that together, summarize people's comments, break it down, and then, to me, that is like the first couple of pages of stuff that we give to the selectmen, and we've got that.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so I would say that, if we're looking to create mooring regulations, we should create mooring regulations that regulate all of the moorings.
Yes.
And so I think whatever we do, because I'm not saying that riparian owners need to pay a fee or that anybody needs to pay a fee necessarily. That's going to be something up to the select board as to how do you, if the select board decides to regulate it and they want someone to regulate it, then who pays for that? Is it people that are creating the demand for that resource, meaning people who have moorings, or is it the entire town? I mean, you might not go to the library, but we all pay taxes that help support the library. You may never drive on a certain road, but we all pay taxes. How do we do that? I don't think that that's necessarily our charge. I certainly don't want to get into the weeds of that. I'd rather leave that to these folks that we elect.
Well, and I'm
Personally.
to that point, we can look at that, but one thing to think about is, and this goes to your point, early on, there will probably be a fair amount of work organizing any mooring here.
Right.
And,
Or any more.
or any mooring, any regulation that we have, having that out there, someone's gonna be in a boat trying to figure out, yes, that's a good spot, no, that's a bad spot, or no, you can't use that cinder block or that old engine block, you have to use a real live mooring anchor of some sort. So there's some stuff there. I agree with you. Once things are laid out, and it ought to be, there shouldn't be a whole, it won't be like Steve Pixley in the summertime down in Camden. But going forward, if there's an inland harbor master, you want to have want to help pay the freight for that person, whatever stipend they get. And, you know, there'll probably be some sort of fee for moorings, and whether they're, you know, how onerous that is, I don't know. You know, I mean, you know, there's,
Well, I would-
I bet in Camden, on the Camden side of McGonagall, well, what do you guys think? 100 moorings?
Totally. Yeah. I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah,
200 moorings, 100 moorings? What do you think?
Off private people's?
Yes, just
Oh, yeah,
in
I'll bet
Camden,
they're
not in
probably-
Lincolnville.
I bet there's between 1 and 200.
I bet
I
it's,
mean,
I
when
bet
you-
it's lower
when you-
than that, though.
When you take into consideration floats and everything that are
Well,
anchored,
remember,
I mean,
a
those
swim
are, you know,
float,
those are.
but if you've got a ramp going out, that's not counting it.
But still, I mean, well, I'll just give you an example. I used to dive and look at the chain that held our moorings. And there were a couple summers when I dove down, and that chain was so thin, you know, it just wears and wears and wears. It's a good galvanized chain, you put it in. But over the course of time, it's just gonna wear down to nothing. And one bad blow, and the whole dock and I mean, it could have been the rock that holds the ramp right off the edge, which is a much bigger expense to repair than just putting in a chain. So,
But I would say that for now, I think we should stick to moorings, which is or a float mooring, you know, a swim float out there on a mooring line, as opposed to looking at docks. We can, as I've said numerous times in this meeting, if we want to continue meeting after this gets squared away and deal with all sorts of other stuff going on, I don't have a problem with it. But for now, I think let's just stick to riparian owner and non-riparian owner moorings.
yeah.
Like freestanding mooring.
Exactly. You
they don't
gotta-
well,
you either
mine's
gotta go
attached
up-
to my dock, but
You've got an outhaul to it.
is that what that is?
Yes,
That-
yes, yeah. I think we probably still have to call that.
Yeah,
same
and that's
thing, so,
fine, you know, yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, and I mean, and it could be something that, you know, was as simple as, you know, because there is some front-end work, you know, there's an application fee. So you apply,
Yeah.
and once you've applied, then you just, you know, the renewal is whatever, you know, it's like, I mean, renewing the license on your boat, if you've got a motor on it, you got to pay $15 or something like that. Something that would be very simple and not onerous because I don't think anybody wants you to feel like, oh, I can't put my sailboat out on the lake.
I would be surprised if I certainly wouldn't be interested in having any kind of onerous fees, you know, like
Yeah, but just-
$25, something like that, whatever, you know, whatever makes it
A
worthwhile. for the-
processing fee, so it's not
Right.
about this, it's not scaled to the
Right.
size of the boat or whatever, it's just, this is the fee that it takes because somebody's got to keep track of whatever is going on. And as you say, I don't know that we haven't had a lot of problems with boats floating away or floats floating away. I mean, there's occasional stuff. But we can leave that open for the future if somebody wants to, if we need to. But when, the time to do it is when someone is, I think, putting it in. And so someone looks at it and says, it's 50-pound mushroom, not adequate for that boat. You really need, here's the recommendation. You look at U.S. boats and harbors or whatever, and it says that boat ought to have X amount because it's got so much windage, and this is what you put in, and then realize that that's probably got about a 3-year lifespan on it. And so it's up to you. Keep track of it.
Yeah.
But again, as I said, inspection of any of this stuff isn't necessarily like you got to deal with out here, where someone dives on it or someone pulls it up and puts it back down, because it's all in shallow water. You can just go down there with a.
Yeah.
Someone, you go out with a
YouTube, you can
snorkel,
look
you
at
just
it,
dive
know,
down with a pair of swim goggles, and you say, hey, this looks okay, or like you did, geez, my chain's getting really thin. I mean,
Yeah.
you want to fix that because you
Yeah.
don't want the bigger problem. There's a huge vested interest that we each have in, regardless of whether it's a little sailboat or it's
No, that's
a,
exactly right. And I agree with that 100%. I think we can do it reasonably.
yeah.
If there is a mooring.
It's 7 o'clock here, so, and you need to go to a birthday party.
Oh, where's that?
My granddaughter Now the whole world knows.
Yes.
My granddaughter, Harper Coburn, is having her 13th birthday.
Oh, cool.
Whose baby is it?
This is Triss's.
Oh, she's not a baby.
Yeah, she's not a baby.
Whose child?
Trish's, okay.
Triss, yeah. So,
So anyway, moving forward, I'll send out an email, try to get people to, we've discussed, I've written some notes, but if people could sort of flesh out why they think Bog is good, why they think Barrett's is good or bad, and just sort of think of that stuff, safety, navigation, aquatic habitat, whatever you come up with, and it doesn't have to be 14 pages long. I just need a paragraph or two, but something so I can then put that into a document that we have, and then I'll distribute it to everyone. So, what is people's, I know we're getting into the holiday season, so it's going to be a little tight, but what's people's schedule for next week?
I could make a meeting, I'm sure.
yeah, I'm sure I probably can. I don't have my calendar with me, but if you schedule.
I will put that in the email, and I'll bang that out tomorrow.
I can't do
And,
Tuesday.
You can't do Tuesday?
I
Okay.
can't.
Select board meeting Tuesday, other than that.
So maybe Wednesday of next week. And what we do is we've got this stuff here, and I think one of the things we can do now is start looking at some of those things, as you were talking about earlier, of general things we think that an ordinance should have in it, the white ball with a blue thing on it and stuff like that. And we've got a lot of that in the can already. I know David said I should look at the harbor ordinance already. As you know, I already wrote up an inland harbor ordinance based on our harbor ordinance, our existing one, but it's really long because you have to deal with so much more stuff out there than we have to, and I don't think, and I agree, we can simplify that quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, very good.
What I'll do is, I hopefully will get an update from Harrison.
Yeah,
and I'll
they
send-
send that,
I'll
send
send that
that
to everyone.
That'd be fantastic.
And I also, Jeremy Martin had sent me these 8 pages that are state statute around this
Yeah.
stuff, which I don't know if you may have seen this
Yeah, I've got it in
already,
here,
but
yeah.
I'm not sure everyone has. So he sort of figured out which pages made sense, and I'll send this around to everyone, because I think it is also, it gives some guidance on how the state interprets their right to the waters, and then what people can do in the waters of the state, because I think we have to be cognizant of that. The other thing is, Bill Kelly is going to be hired by the town starting like next week, and as legal counsel, and obviously, a lot of this stuff will at some point need to get that, will have to be reviewed by legal to see, are we suggesting to do things that we don't have the rights to do?
Right.
It's not clear to me yet whether the state has to approve, and that was one question I forgot to ask the Harrison guy. The towns have the ability to make these things, but I don't know what the state's ability is to review it and say, hey, that's not okay.
Based on
go ahead.
my conversations with folks at Harrison and Casco and a few other places, and talking with the state,
Okay,
that the folks at the state, the staffers, wish that the legislature would give them a little more teeth to review things, but they said it's been very clear that the legislature's pretty much thrown up their hands and said, let the towns deal with it.
That was the same message that I got.
yeah. So, yeah, there may not be any review then by them, or any significant review by them,
exactly.
which they're probably smart to stay the heck out of it.
Very good.
Great.
Happy Thanksgiving,
Well, thank you.
everyone.
Guys.
Thank you guys for